Welcome back to the channel, guys. Today we're going to be talking about aesthetics, and we're going to be talking about how to do a chop. Now you can see this has already been started, but what I'm going to do is talk you through, as a beginner, if you're planning on chopping a car, how should you go about deciding on the height of the chop? Are there any kind of principles to follow? How do you check your measurements? How do you make your measurements? And how do you actually start to get the top down and lined up? During the course of this, we'll be using some measurements off this car, and we'll also spend a little bit of time looking at what I need to do to get this finished, because it is only tacked in to place. Caveat to this is that aesthetics are obviously kind of in the eye of the person looking at it, but there are some principles that you can use to make sure that your chop doesn't look too small, too large, doesn't look flat, doesn't look out of proportion. And these kind of general rules hold regardless of whether you're chopping a shoebox like this one or whether you're looking at doing a Chevy or anything like that. There's very little difference between them. Some of the earlier square bodied cars, your T's and your A's and stuff like that, you might want to chop a little bit further, but for these kind of cars, the rules that I'm going to talk you through do kind of follow almost regardless of the body style. So the very first time you Google how far should I chop a car, everyone's going, oh, how far did you chop that? What's it at the front? What's it at the back? Should they be the same? How far do I need to chop it? And they kind of expect there to be almost a hard and fast measurement, you know, oh, it's a 5 and a 7 or a 3 and a 4 or whatever that might be. But it's much better to not go by some arbitrary number from the book, but instead to get your tape measure and to follow what I'm going to call the rule of 3. And by the rule of 3, what I mean is the distance from the bottom of your sill or your rocker panel in the States to your swage line or your belt line needs to be twice the distance as the distance from your swage line to the top of your roof. So it's in thirds, 1/3 being your swage to roof line and 2/3 being your door to the bottom of your sill or your rocker panel, and then that gives you the distance that you need to chop it. So in this particular case, I have already pre-measured this, and we have a visible distance from rocker to swage line of about 32 inches or 81.5 centimeters in Roman Catholic. And so therefore what I needed to do to make it an appealing 2/3, 1/3 height was to make the distance from the swage line to the roof about 16 inches. Which is, although it's difficult to see on camera because of the angle, precisely what that is. So then all I did was I subtracted what I needed to take out of the pillars from the original measurement, and I can't really remember what that original measurement was. I think it was something like 19 inches. I seem to remember I took about 3 inches vertical out of it. 3 inches vertical gave me 4 inches at the pillar, and so what I did was I chopped 4 inches out of that A pillar and then just cut all of the other pillars, chop the B pillars out and cut the sail panels, the C pillars there at the bottom, and that gave me my initial vertical drop. Now this is a chop that you'll see in a moment with sloping pillars, and it's lower at the back. So why did I decide to do it lower at the back? Why did I not decide to do it equidistant all the way along? And we'll look into the reason for that in a moment, and I'll show you on the car how I went about doing it. So when I took 4 inches out of vertical there, or sorry, 4 inches out the pillar, which gave me a 3 inch vertical drop, I ended up with a distance, if I measure this on the flat part of 13.5 inches between the swage line, the belt line, and the drip rail on the flat bit there. And so what I wanted to do was to keep those two lines parallel, because I think a chop with those two lines parallel up until the drip rail starts curving away gives a nice aesthetic look. So if I take another flat section on here, we can see again we've got 13.5 inches. From there on backwards, the drip rail starts sloping away. Now what that meant was, in order to keep these two parallel, the rear had to come down a lot more than 4 inches. If I remember rightly, it's somewhere in the region of about 7 inches, 6.5, 7 inches out of the back. But it doesn't really matter, because what you do is you cut it around there and you just lower it until you can get these measurements to be equal. Because if you keep it 4 inches at the front, 4 inches at the back, you end up with a rising drip rail. And to me, that just doesn't look good, because what we've got here, if I can get that on camera, is a nice profile. We'll look at the size of the rear windows and stuff in a moment, but what it's important to try and do as well, and admittedly there is a bit of sinkage there that when I finish this job I'm going to get rid of, is to keep the crown in the roof. So you can see the crown of the roof follows its original profile and slopes down nicely to the rear window, where the rear window has been cut out and tilted forwards. What I've also done is keep the original profile of this swage line as it ran round here. I've just moved it forwards by however much it needed to be moved forwards. Again, these are not hard and fast measurements. This distance here just became whatever distance it was in order to make the front end look right. And aesthetically wise, that's, in my opinion, the best way of doing it. Don't set out with a specific measurement in mind of how much you want to take out. Take out as much as you need in order to make it look the way that you want it to look. And in my opinion, this is how you want it to look. Now there's a choice between angled B-pillars or straight B-pillars. Now because I haven't done a hugely massive chop, the B-pillars are angled in such a way that when the rear of this car sits at ride height and the front sits at ride height, they are almost vertical because of the tail dragger stance. Problem with these is if you go straight vertical pillar, is what you end up doing is very rapidly making the rear window area smaller. Very small, in fact, in comparison to the front. Whereas what we've got now is, if you imagine that that's going to have a quarter light in there, they are similar sizes, and again it just looks aesthetically pretty nice. So that's how to set up and how to measure it. So in a minute we'll look at what happens when you actually cut it and drop it back down. So when you cut a roof off, obviously what you're doing is you're moving a small area, dropping it down into the space where a larger area sat. Imagine chopping the top off an egg and then removing the center section of an egg and trying to lower the lid of the egg back down. It's not going to fit. So what do you have to do to make it fit? Again, all these welds need tidying up, they're just tacked in place. But what you're going to need to do is you're going to need to bring the top part of this pillar out and the bottom part of this pillar in. So there are some relief cuts there, there is a relief cut up there, and all I did was put a strap, ratchet strap between these 2 points and ratcheted that inwards and then pushed that out. This still needs a relief cut across there so that I can bring all of this up and keep the original brow shape of the car there. But fundamentally that's how you do it. You tilt those bottom half of the pillar in, you tilt the top half of the pillar out. At the back it does mean you have to rebuild the entire thing. So all of these are rebuilt sail panels to replace what was there, because this area ends up going right inside and nothing fits at all. hence the reason why I've also got a replacement piece that is currently just sitting in there. As I say, it looks very uneven at the moment, but all of this is going to be hammer and dollied out, and this area is going to be fixed up. And so that leaves you with a nice profile on the screen, and you'd almost not notice that it's chopped. I have left the angle, the rake if you like, of the screen standard, because when you drop it down it looked quite good. Some people will angle that further back, and then any kind of changes that you do like that are going to potentially involve you messing with the roof, and I really didn't want to mess with the roof, because the roof skin wants to stay with its crown that direction and with the same crown that direction, so you don't get horrible flat bits. You do see some chops that are potentially overdone, where this bit has just lost all of its crown and it flops and kind of goes almost straight down, and I don't like that look, and I don't like the fastback look, hence the reason why I've gone for that swage line there. So as I say, its aesthetics are a little bit in the eye of the beholder, but measure it, cut it, don't work by what someone says on the ham, because this must be a 4 and a 5 inch or a 5 inch at the front or whatever. This, by the way, the caveat on this, or another caveat on this is a chop that's set up for a car that doesn't lay frame. You can get away with chopping these shoeboxes quite a lot more and they will still look decent, but you have to have them very low at the ground, otherwise they don't look great. They look overly done. Almost anything can look good if it's sitting on the floor, but if you actually want to drive it around at a decent height, then a chop like this is kind of the way to go, because it looks aesthetically decent at almost any kind of ride height. So how much material did we actually take out? Well, I think this shows it off better than anything. So this is the old interior trim piece for the rear window, and as you can see, it's a hell of a lot smaller than it was. The corner has moved forwards by about 8 inches, and as I say, it's about 4 inches vertical at the top there, but as you can see, as it goes away at the back, the distance between here and here gets a lot bigger, because we've taken a lot more out of it at the rear than we have at the front, hence the reason why we've got the nice profile. Now, there are loads of ways of checking that it's actually even from one side to another, which is obviously pretty important because you don't want it to be lopsided. One of the ways that I do it is with the tape measure, but also with a template, which is eventually going to be turned into some wood to be used as a template for cutting the flat glass. So what we can do is we can stick this on the rear quarter areas, the rear windows, and just see what the profile of that actually looks like. Does it match from side to side? It's not a very well cut piece of cardboard, and there is obviously work that needs to be done on the radius of this corner, because the radius of that corner is not finished, and it's not finished on the other side, but that kind of sits in there. This radius, by the way, down here, I've just used the bottom sort of 4 inches of the original window, because again, I think that this, although it's now larger in comparison to the size of the window than it was in comparison to the size of the original bigger window, the radius of it looks really good. You do see some people that make this a lot tighter. They take this window out to about here. I just don't think it sits quite right. I like having that match that. Again, it just balances it out from front to back. So let's take our little template round the other side and just see how close we are. All the measurements work out, and again, it fits right in there. Not quite at the corner there, because there needs a little bit of work on the radius of that, but you can see the windows are the same size and the same height from side to side. So we're basically good on that one. So what I'm going to be doing in videos on this is kind of looking at individual little bits, one bit at a time. So we'll fix up the front where it's just been tacked into place. I'll show you how to sort out areas like this with relief cuts, how to do the B pillars, finish off the back end, and then we'll work on doing some customizing work inside here, and then that will be it. I have decided that I'm going to go back to original colour, which is this 1950 Palisade green. See, it's still a vaguely shiny bit of it in there, and I think that will just sit quite nicely with that. So there you go. Hopefully that was an interesting little run around my thought process as to how to go about chopping one of these. Where do you start? How do you measure? How do you take your measurements? Where do you take your measurements, and what sort of things are you looking for when you do it? Everybody likes a chop to look different, but no one likes something that looks pancaked and sat on and flat in all the wrong sort of places. So if you abide by a few of those cardinal sort of rules, some of which have been passed down through the ages, some of which have just literally been made up by me, probably not uniquely made up by me, but I just decided that was how I wanted to do it, and I think the profile of it looks really, really good. So chuck me any comments. What do you think? Ignore the standard of the welding on there for a moment, because it is just tacked into place. Let's just look primarily today at the aesthetics. How does it look? What does the profile look like? What do you think of the lines? Till next time, guys, take care.